Hello everybody, welcome back to Arsenal Pass. Today we have a Briar deck tech. We're going to be talking about the Lightning Briar deck. This deck has obviously seen a lot of success in the recent weeks. By the time that I'm recording this, it did win the United States Nationals, it won UK Nationals, as well as had some very good performances in the Calling Orlando. I played this list at the Calling Orlando, as well as some of my teammates, Hayden Dale and Dante. This is the list that we played. It's almost, card for card, it's almost the same as Tariq's list. Tariq Patel, who won US Nationals. We did make a few changes right before the event, but ultimately he actually gave me the list on Friday when I wasn't doing so well in Nationals, and then we took it to a pretty good finish in the Orlando. So in Orlando, I went 8-3, Hayden went 8-3, and then Dante made it to the quarterfinals. So pretty good performance overall. So let's talk about the deck sort of ethos, right? So it's mostly not paying for cards, right? You have all zero cost cards, well, virtually all, right? And your idea is to come in with multiple attacks at breakpoints like 4 or 7 and, not pitch another card. So you kind of inherently have that one card of card advantage on your opponent because you're just not pitching. So you're playing an extra card per hand. So ideally, we're coming in with multiple 4-attack breakpoints. We're stacking up something called an Embodiment of Earth token. So every time you hit your opponent with an attack, you are going to get an Embodiment of Earth. And what that will do is on that next turn, and on your turn as well, it'll let you block with a non-attack action and will increase the defense value by 1 for each Embodiment of Earth token. So what that does is it leads into a sort of kind of tempo gameplay where you're able to attack very efficiently. You're not pitching at all. You're coming with multiple attacks at breakpoints, but then you're also able to defend really efficiently, right? So if you do get those 2, 3, sometimes 4 embodiments, you can often fully block out your opponent with even just one, one non-attack action draw on the following turn. That being said, this deck sometimes, even when it does have 3, 4, 5 embodiments, and it has the non-attack action to block, sometimes it just won't block. It's very much about being the aggressor, maintaining tempo, and just, outputting a lot of damage to your opponent. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the cards. So right here I have our Lightning package. One thing to note before we get into it is one of these attack actions, Entwine Lightning. That is, so if you do fuse Entwine Lightning with a Lightning card that does have Go Again, that being said, it's not completely necessary, right? Entwine Lightning does have that inherent, bonus if you are able to fuse it, but if you're not, it's totally okay. 0 for 4 or 0 for 4 or 7 off of a Lightning token, right? So that's totally fine, but it does give us a potential upside with these Lightning cards. Now we go into Ball Lightning, a card we're all very familiar with now after the Limited season and obviously the Constructed season. So Ball Lightning is pretty crucial to this deck. There's a couple really important things you can do with Ball Lightning, right? So off of a sort of like you could say a 2-card hand, right? You can do a non-attack action like Nimblism, then you can play Ball Lightning. Then if your Tunic's at 3, we do play Findel Spring Tunic, and we'll get into the Tunic and the Sideboard cards after this. You are able to go non-attack action, Ball Lightning, and then swing the sword for 2 arcane and 2 physical. It's a very efficient attack, especially when you've had to block out a little bit potentially. If you're not blocking out, right, Ball Lightning does have this multiplicative effect, right? So as you play more Ball Lightnings, they keep buffing each other up. Particularly, this is very important with something like Sting of Sorcery. But, if you are coming with multiple Ball Lightnings on a turn, your opponent, if they're going to block out one, is very incentivized to keep blocking them out. So kind of keep taking cards out of their hand, keep maintaining tempo, and keep being the aggressor. Next, we have Lightning Surge. Lightning Surge is very similar to Entwine Lightning, right? So we have that bonus upside if we're able to put it in Arsenal, but if not, totally fine, right? We're going to be creating a lot of Embodiment of Lightnings with this deck, and 0 for 4 without Go Again at the end of your chain is totally fine, because actually on a lot of our combat chains we'll have Plunder Run, so there will be a draw trigger potentially that the opponent's going to have to block out, or you're going to be able to draw and potentially could put a card in your arsenal. Before I head into Lightning Press, let's talk about the sort of arsenal and the ethos of the arsenal in this deck, right? The good thing about this deck, I think that it's, in my opinion, it's very much a 5-card hand deck. You're very much playing with your arsenal and playing with a full hand and creating these large turns based around that. This deck primarily likes to arsenal Plunder Run, very much a Plunder Run deck. That being said, though, pretty much every single card in your deck is a fantastic card to arsenal at any time. So if you're coming in with a combat chain that has a Plunder Run on it, and you do end, with like a 0 for 4 that's not Snatch or, just whatever, your opponent is heavily incentivized to kind of keep blocking that out, because even if they do take even 1 to 2 damage off the final attack that you come in with, if you're able to draw and put a card in Arsenal and then play another 5-card hand to them, it's just absolutely devastating. So let's get on to our first whiff here. So Lightning Press is considered a whiff, so why is it considered a whiff? So a key card in our deck is actually going to be Sonata Arcanix. Sonata Arcanix heavily relies on you having a balance of attack actions and non-attack actions. So Lightning Press is a attack reaction, so it actually satisfies neither of those, and it's considered a whiff. So it's the worst thing you want to see off Sonata Arcanix, and we actually avoid putting in more cards like this because of that reason, right? So if you think you might see this when you play the mirror, like Sigil of Suffering, defense reactions, those are also whiffs. So I think 3 is the max, and Lightning Press does make the cut because it is so good in this deck, right? Like Lightning Press with Plunder Runs, with Snatches, and with Electrifies, which is in the sideboard. Very, very, very powerful. So going through the attack actions here, in Twine Lightning we talked about. Going on to Snatch. Snatch is just a great card to have at the end of your combat chain or with an embodiment of lightning. Just giving you that 0 for 4, threatening the draw. Fantastic with your Lightning Press as well. A really, really key card in this deck. Next we have, this is actually one of my favorite cards in the deck, Ravenous Rabble. So most of your deck is red, so your Ravenous Rabbles are most of the time just going to be discounted by 1. And I don't say they're for 4 because actually in the sideboard we have yellow ones as well. But yeah. A vast majority of the time, your Ravenous Rabble will be revealing a red off the top and will be coming in for 4 if it's the red Ravenous Rabble, or for 3 if it's the yellow. Sometimes you will hit that blue, but that's just how it goes. The most important thing about Ravenous Rabble is that it is a 0 for X and does have inherent Gogan. Really, really important. Inherent Gogan is probably one of the most important things in this deck. Next, we're on to Scar for Scar. This is not, inherent Gogan, but it's conditional. So often you will be on lesser life, especially if you're in the mirror or something like this. You can actually manipulate your life total to, stay on a lesser life total to just turn on your Scar for Scar. So 0 for 4th Gogan, very, very good, and absolutely where you want to be. Usually with the Briar deck, the more attacks you're putting on the combat chain per turn, usually the better you're doing, right? Those are kind of what you want to do. The worst turns that you have, well, the absolute worst turn you have is if you draw 4 non-attack actions, but then after that, kind of the worst turns you have are like Snatch for 4, and you have like a couple of cards in hand, or even just Snatch for 7. Just that's not really good enough, and not what we're trying to do. Next, we go to Enlightened Strike. Lightning Strike's a really interesting card. I think a lot of people will be very used to playing Enlightened Strike for 7. While you do that in this deck, it is pretty often that you are going to Enlightened Strike, go again, keep attacking on the chain, or probably my most used mode is going to be Enlightened Strike draw. So if I'm playing Enlightened Strike at the end of a combat chain, there's like a 99% chance, obviously it's conditional on life totals, but I'm actually going to do E-Strike draw. Mainly going back to that reason that every card in this deck is fantastic to Arsenal, and I want to be playing 5-card hands, and I also consider myself to be a Plunder Run deck. So the more Plunder Runs that I play out of Arsenal, pretty much the better my game is going every single time. Next we have Arcanic Shockwave. It's a 0 for 4. If you do fuse it with a lightning card, you will get that arcane damage. Important to note that if you do hit your opponent with that arcane, you are going to create the embodiment of Earth. Really good in the mirror, really good for tempo. It almost kind of feels like you get a free embodiment of Earth token. That being said, without Go Again, there's only so many spots for cards like this in the deck, and I think that Arcanic Shockwave does satisfy the role that it's trying to play, right? All right, so now let's head into the non-attack actions. Firstly, I want to talk about Briar's ability. So if you do play 2 non-attack actions at any time during your turn, you will create something called an embodiment of lightning token. What that is that it'll let your next attack action have Go Again. So you can play that at the end of your combat chain and maintain it for your next turn, or you can go ahead and play the attack action and we'll just get Go Again. So for instance, in Arcanic Shockwave, we'll get Go Again, then you may be able to swing at the blade or attack again. So starting out, we have Sting of Sorcery. So Sting of Sorcery, not very good to hit off Ravenous Rabble, but I think to be one of the most important cards in the deck for a few reasons. So if you look at it in the mirror, it's going to allow you to generate a lot of embodiments on your opponent, where they actually cannot deny you. They can't block you out. They can't really do anything about it. They're not going to be running Null Rune. That being said, you're going to probably lead into their turn with 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 embodiments because you play the Sting of Sorcery in multiple attack actions, and then you might be able to just blank their Plunder Run turn with 1 non-attack action, right? So my non-attack action that usually blocked for 2 might end up blocking for 5, 6, or maybe even 7 on their turn. So very, very good Sting of, very, very good card in the mirror, Sting of Sorcery, and often can be quite a turning point in a Briar mirror match. All right, heading into Nimblism. Nimblism is very vanilla, right? It's just going to be that +3 with Go Again. We don't play anything like Nimble Strike, so this is basically just a pump, and it's mostly there to actually create embodiment of lightning tokens like we just talked about. The pump is very good on things like Snatch, and for playing Plunder Run, any kind of bonus damage is great. So Nimblism is just kind of our vanilla, pump card. Next, we head into Sonata Arcanics, which we talked about a little bit. Sonata, we're almost always playing for 0. Sometimes, let's say I draw a full hand of non-attack actions. This is actually one of the reasons Sonata's in the deck. I might be able to pay, 4 or 6 out of hand, because just of the extra cards, and find the attack action. Again, I want to reiterate that the worst thing that can happen when you're playing this deck is that you draw 4 non-attack actions. You want to avoid that in any way possible. Sometimes this means arsenaling the attack action, but often it's just like, hopefully you just don't get so unlucky that you draw that. But yeah, Sonata Arcanics can really bail you out of that scenario. But mostly you're paying it for 0, you're getting the extra attack action, and then you're pinging your opponent for 1. Very, very good card. Next we have Weave Lightning. Obviously kind of the same thing as Symbolism, but conditional, so not nearly as good, but does function as a fuse target for Arcanic Shockwave and Entwine Lightning, so good in that sense, and obviously it will be helping you to create the embodiment of lightning tokens as well. Next, we're going to talk about the most important card in the deck, in my opinion. That's going to be Plunder Run. So I would say, more than anything we've talked about, more than this being a 0 for 4 deck or a deck that doesn't pitch, we are very much a Plunder Run deck, right? The more Plunder Runs we're playing out of Arsenal, or even the more Plunder Runs we're playing in general, probably the better our game is going most of the time. So our number 1 target to Arsenal is going to be Plunder Run, right? We do want to get the bonus damage effect, but these draw triggers are just brutal for the opponent, because everything's coming in for 4, and it's so ineffective to block something like that, right? They can have the defense reactions, that's fine, but eventually you're going to grind them out to the point where they've exhausted their armor, they've exhausted their defense reactions. Now they have to wonder, right? Am I committing 2 cards to try and block this, 0 for 4 with Go again, but there's a Plunder Run on the chain, so it's threatening a draw. And your biggest turns are almost universally with Plunder Run. So the more, just kind of, if we want to take a heuristic away from that, if you have a Plunder Run in hand, and you have an option to arsenal it, it's almost always going to be better to play the 5-card hand of the following turn with Plunder Run and Arsenal, rather than just kind of like, aggro out a 4-card hand and try to push as much damage as possible. You want to be playing around those 5-card hands, playing those Plunder Runs, and threatening those draw triggers. So that's going to conclude our main deck for the Lightning Briar deck. So like I said, 51 cards, 21 attack actions, 21 non-attack actions, 27 attack actions, and 3 whiffs. Now we're going to go ahead and head into the sideboard. All right, so heading into the sideboard here, first thing we're going to talk about is the armor, right? So we start off with the Rosetta Thorn. Rosetta Thorn was quite the upgrade in Tales of Aria. I think it's almost universally used across all Rune Blades now. Just fantastic, right? You play a non-attack action and an attack action, and your Rosetta Thorn will be coming in for 2 arcane and 2 physical. It also costs only 1 resource, so obviously that cost is very important for this deck. Usually you're mostly swinging Rosetta Thorn off the Fyendal's Tunic. If you are in like a slower fatigue match, you will sometimes pitch that card, for later, and then go ahead and swing the blade. It's just very efficient. Other than that, often it's going to be off Tunic, and you might do it 2, maybe 3 times in a game. Next, we have the Fyendal Spring Tunic, the aforementioned resource generator in this deck. That is how we're going to cast our 1-cost cards, so things like Electrify, or ideally cast our 1-cost cards, and Rosetta Thorn. And yeah, in the mirror, you might only see 1 activation, 1 instance of 3 counters on the Fyendal Spring Tunic, but in other matchups that can last a bit longer, you can get a lot of use out of it, and it's quite good. Next, we have the Grasp of the Arknight. The rune chants you can create with this, they can be pretty effective on turn 0, just to create that amount of incremental advantage over your opponent. But overall, this is just it's very, very good for blocking, right? We don't have anything in our deck that really benefits from a rune chant, so Grasp of the Arknight, just the best hand piece available, right? So next we have Snapdragon Scalers. So we have chosen Snapdragon Scalers over something like the Spellbound Creepers. Obviously this is because every single card in our deck does cost 0, or at least every single attack action does, except for these Command and Conquers, which have a very niche use case. So there's going to be a lot of times where, your Snapdragon turn, just like any deck that really uses Snapdragon Scalers, your Snapdragon turns are usually going to be on a pivot turn, right? Where you are coming in with multiple attacks, your opponent can't block anymore, and boom, on an attack that you didn't have Go Again on, or a Snatch that they let through that has a Plunder Run on the combat chain, we're going to draw 2 cards, you're going to have Snapdragon Scalers and have your big turn. So really, really probably the most important piece of armor, in my opinion. Next, we have Arcanite Skullcap. There is a small argument, and I think it's considerable though, for Hope Merchant's Hood in the mirror. Hope Merchant's Hood does let you, basically take your hand, put it back into your deck, shuffle up, and then draw another 4 or draw another X, however many you put back. Really can be really good, right? If you draw the 4 non-attacks, that's your get out of jail, and that's really important because in the mirror, pretty much the first who stumbles loses, so you don't want to be the first Briar player to be drawing the 4 non-attack. That being said, blocking for 3 over the course of a game and also being able to utilize Skullcack to block arcane damage can be really important. We're not going to be ever blocking arcane damage during the normal cycle of the game, but we can get in the Briar Mirror match especially, we can get into this very grindy scenario with another Runeblade, where they're actually probably going to be blocking with something like 3 cards, and they might try to do something like create a Rune Chant with Grass, swing the blade. That is probably one of the most technical scenarios in this deck, and in that scenario, it's really important to manage your life total, go to 1, or kind of be on equal life, and always try to turn off their skull cap so they can't do that. You'll see a lot of games end, so if you actually go back and watch the Nationals of the US coverage, you'll see Tariq do this twice, both in the quarterfinals and the finals. We'll go to 1, then we'll create a Rune Chant X, create a Rune Chant attack, create a Rune Chant, it doesn't matter, right? Both opponents with Rune Blades can't block the damage. So an important endgame scenario to understand when you go into Briar Mirrors. So let's go ahead and talk about the sideboard cards, right? So we said 51 card main deck. So what are we siding in? So we've got Captain's Call and Electrify. These I almost universally will play. I either play 2 red Captain's Calls, or more often I'll play the 1 red Captain's Call and the 1 red Electrify. Electrify, very, very powerful card in this deck. That being said, you really only want to see it when you can cast it with a Tunic counter, and you don't ever really want to see it at multiples. So that's why I've opted for the split, but it's still something I'm experimenting with. Both cards are very powerful in their own right. Red Captain's Call because we are sometimes, and especially in the mirror, a 6 Ravenous Rabble deck. So we don't want those blues in if we can avoid them. So we have the most interesting card, I think, in the deck, and the biggest question, right, which is the Gorganian Tome. So you're going to be playing against a lot of other Rune Blades in this meta, and they're going to have Gorganian Tome in their deck. So you have a question: do I play the Gorganian Tome or do I not? Right. So if I have the Gorganian Tome in my deck and I play it, and my opponent has it in their deck, when they play theirs, if they play it after me, they're going to draw 2 cards. So something to consider. You have to wonder: is it a symmetrical effect, right? Who gets the bigger bonus out of the Gorganian Tome? If I'm playing against a Viserai, like if we look at Matt Rogers' list, more of a OTK kind of sets up combo list, I feel like I get more value out of the Gorganian Tome, so I will be happily played in that matchup, wouldn't even consider it, right? And I assume that the Viserai list will actually be siding it out, because they want to deny me being able to draw the 2 cards. When it comes to the mirror, that's more player preference based. There is an argument, right? If you want to just look at it from a pure philosophical standpoint, I know a lot, some people, like we had Tariq on for a time of the round, kind of equates this to the prisoner's dilemma, right? Where you kind of have to play it, or you're just inherently disadvantaging yourself, and your opponent will always play it and have the advantage on yourself, right? So I don't want to get too much into it, but yeah, that's really up to you. It's like, do you play it or do you not in the mirror? Next, we have Pulse of Candlehold. So Pulse of Candlehold is interesting. This gets into kind of what's the mirror tech, right? And while Pulse of Candlehold is not our mirror tech, there was an argument, right? So the current mirror tech in this deck, so the mirror tech being Lightning Briar versus Lightning Briar, we're playing 6 Ravenous Rabble, so we're going to bring these yellow Rabbles in. We're also going to bring this Pulse in, but I experimented for a while with the Pulse and then 3 Force of Natures. So why? So if you get an embodiment token, 1 embodiment token, you're already going to be blocking for 4. If you get 2 embodiment tokens, we're talking 5. If you get to 3 or 4, you're looking at breakpoints like 7, so potentially blanking their plunder on turn. It's just about how do I efficiently block against my opponent and deny them the most value, right? So if I can block with 1 card for 7 and turn off a plunder on into a 0 for 4 kind of combat chain, that can be very effective for me. So there's sort of a dichotomy right there in the different lines of thought. It's, do I play the very efficient blocking cards, or do I play something like Ravenous Rabble and always have my foot on the gas, be generating the most embodiment tokens I can? So that's mostly up to you. This list right now is playing the Ravenous Rabble, which I found to be, I think, more consistent and a bit better. The blocking idea might just be pulling a little bit too far away from the deck's core competency, so the Ravenous Rabble is going to be quite good. So why is Pulse of Candlehold in the deck? It's okay in the mirror. So if you draw this with something like a Sting, you have 2 Ball Lightnings in hand, you can play the Sting, play this, Sorry, you can Arsenal the Sting, play this, play other attack actions, draw the 2 ball lightnings, and then come in with kind of a budget deck setup, right? So like a Sting ball on your Briar opponent, that can be quite good. And it's a good blocking card as well. That being said, you don't have to play this in the mirror. It's the most important use case of it is against fatigue, actually. So you have sort of a limited number of ball lightnings. You may have some get discarded to something like a crippling crush or some effects that you might actually not be able to control, or maybe you just feel like you have to run them out. And Pulse Mechanical can help you get those ball lightnings back into your deck. Because so after this sideboard guide, I'm gonna outline the deck stack against fatigue and how you stack the deck to pretty much beat fatigue 100% of the time. Not that you will beat it 100% of the time because it's a little bit challenging, but there is a specific sequence of cards. So let's talk about Exude Confidence. So you're going to be siding this in against pretty much anybody that runs more than 3 defense reactions, right? It's just a great way of denying them. So like the Viserai OTK deck I talked about, any fatigue matchup, Exude Confidence can be absolutely brutal, right? Especially if you get this with an embodiment of Lightning token, maybe with Plunder Run on that turn as well. You can go ahead and pump it over there, whatever they block, get the draw trigger. And yeah, I mean, this really, really punishes decks that run a lot of defense reactions, which is its main use case. Going into Ravis Rabble, this is this deck's kind of mirror breaker, right? So we're going to be playing the 6 Rabbles. Basically 0 for X, usually going to be 3, sometimes 2, with Go Again. Just need as much Go Again as possible, need to be putting as many attacks on the combat chain as possible per turn, generating more embodiments than the opponent and getting more value. So next we have Arcana Crackle, sorry. So 0 for 3 actually, but has 1 Arcane. Very good in the mirror. So you're going to be bringing this in the mirror because it's going to give you a free embodiment. Your opponent can't block the embodiment or just can't efficiently, right? If they're at lower health and they block with their Skull Cap, you're already winning that game. And then 3. So the breakpoint of 3 is actually pretty good against the mirror because your opponent, all of their non-attack actions will block for 2. If they have an embodiment, they do block for 3, correct? But if they have 1 embodiment, sometimes they'll, usually they'll have 2 or 3. Who knows how many times you blocked in the past turn. So the breakpoint of 3 or 4 is actually less relevant in the mirror. So Arcana Crackle is just more kind of a tempo card, gets you the free embodiment for sure, and your opponent might not even efficiently be able to block 3, so you might be getting 2 embodiments. Great on the end of a combat chain. Next we have Blue Captain's Calls. These are purely in the deck to increase blue count against something like a Lexi or an Oldhim, if you think it's necessary, right? I think versus Lexi, I would be playing this card. Versus Oldhim, I don't think so. Because versus Oldhim, you have a very straightforward game plan on getting to the deck stack, poking in damage throughout the game, stacking your deck, and then playing the sequence of Sting of Sorcery, Ball Lightning, Ball Lightning, Ball Lightning. And we'll talk about that sequence later and how much damage it does and how to set it up. Next, we have Blue Ball Lightning. This is purely for the fatigue matchup, right? So you can play with 6 Ball Lightnings in your deck, or you can go ahead and play with 8 here. If you do play with 8, you'll also be adding the blue, so it can help versus some of those Frostbite tokens or ice decks. But mostly it's just insurance, because, right, you're going to need those Ball Lightnings to set up the endgame stack, and sometimes you might have to just play the ones out of your hand rather than pitching them because you feel like you need to pressure your opponent because you might get Oakenold fused, or they might hit you with a Spinal Crush or something like if you don't. So these are insurance. I'm not 100% sure about them, but you would be playing them into fatigue and ice decks. Next we have everybody's favorite card, Coax of Commotion. 0 for 4. This is whatever, right? I'll play this against Bravo. Bravo, like Fatigue, if I know they're kind of Fatigue, even aggro, and against things like Oldhim, because if you create the Quicken token off of this, so if this hits, you're able to create like a Quicken token. The effect is not symmetrical, right? Like Bravo can't really utilize a Quicken token. If it's this more aggressive build that has, like, I don't know what they do, maybe hammer into Zealous Belting, something really inefficient like that, then maybe. But usually they can't even utilize a Quicken token. Bravo's going to be coming in with 1 attack pretty much in every combat chain. Again, unless they're playing Zealous Belting, but if they are playing that card, they're probably going to get it anyway. So you're going to benefit from the Quicken token vastly more than your opponent. So I'll play this into those matchups. Next we have Command and Conquer. This is the card that I'm actually least sure about. The idea is that you play it into Lexi and Bolton. This deck already has a fantastic matchup into Saber Bolton, because Saber Bolton, basically you have a bunch of non-attack actions, already really good for you. You have embodiments, which are going to increase the defensive value of those non-attack actions, so you can deny them a lot of soul throughout the game. And on the turn, they're going to try to combo you out, right? If they're Sabers, they won't be blocking on that turn, so you probably have 2-3 embodiments on that turn anyway. So you can actually potentially just block an entire Saber combo out of hand if you draw the right cards. So it's already very favored, but Command and Conquer is obviously one of the cards that Saber Bolton likes to see the least. And then against Lexi, this will blow up their entire arsenal, so the 2 cards can be good as well. I haven't played this card. I didn't play it against Lexi. I don't know if I would in retrospect, just because it is so hard to cast a Command and Conquer in this deck. So not sure about it, but that is the use case. I just want to bring you up to speed on that. Awesome. So that's kind of an overview of the sideboard guide. If you want to see, which cards come in, exactly which card in, card out for every single matchup in the game, I'm going to have that over on the Arsenal Pass Patreon, as well as a video further going into what to do in each matchup and how you should attack, every hero in the format. With that, let's go ahead and head over to the endgame deck stack or combo that you're going to be beating Fatigue with. All right, so now let's talk about the end game and how to beat Fatigue, as we would say, right? So the idea about Fatigue is that they're going to try to run you out of cards, and you're not going to be able to do enough damage to them before you completely run out of your deck, right? That's the idea. So is that possible against Lightning Briar? Yes, it's possible, especially for something like Oldhim, because they're able to utilize, Crown of Seeds, as well as their defense reaction. They can block you very efficiently. So that being said, though, the other flip side of that coin is that they actually don't pressure you, right? So ideally, Fatigue doesn't pressure you, which allows you to set up the bottom of your deck to your choosing, right? To your liking. So if we're able to do that, as Lightning Briar, we're still going to get in damage. The idea is that we're getting in damage throughout the game. We're not killing the opponent, but we might, right? But this is our insurance. This is what the bottom of our deck is going to look like. We're going to want the opponent around 15 or less life, and then here is our deck stack, right? So we've pitched the deck to have Sting of Sorcery, Ball Lightning, Ball Lightning, Ball Lightning, quite like this. It's hard to pitch stack like this perfectly so you draw these 4 exact cards. The good thing about Fatigue is that often you don't have to draw these 4. So let's say there's 2 cards above these cards. I end up drawing these cards and those other 2 in a 4-card hand. I can make, say these are the other 2 cards. I can make a Rune Chant and then swing the sword if one of them is red, pitch inefficiently. And then I can keep these 2 cards in hand, draw the next 2 like this. And I shouldn't be punished too much because my opponent is playing Fatigue, right? Like, what are they going to hit me with? The hammer? That's what I save my armor for. So I have Sting of Sorcery in Arsenal. I also can have the Ball Lightning. Any of these cards in Arsenal, they're all replaceable. Then we're going to play Sting of Sorcery, and then Ball Lightning. So what happens when we play this first Ball Lightning? As active player, we're going to maintain priority, and we're going to have Ball Lightning's effect resolve first before the opponent can pitch for Arcane Briar. So what I'll do is, we have 2 instances of 1 Arcane. Ball Lightning's effect will bump it, so it will be 2 instances of 2 Arcane, right? So 4 Arcane total, 2 instances of 2 Arcane, and then 3 physical. So then we're going to play our next Ball Lightning. 2 instances of 3 Arcane, so 6 Arcane total. So now we're at 8 total Arcane as well as 3 physical again. Our final Ball Lightning, 2 instances of 4 Arcane. So now we're at 8 Arcane plus 3 damage. So what is that? Overall, that's 16 Arcane, a lot of which cannot be blocked, right? Your opponent will likely only have Null Rune 1. Maybe they'll have Null Rune 2. Doesn't matter. So we have 16 Arcane as well as 9 physical damage. This is the most efficient deck stack to beat Fatigue with. You can do it pretty consistently if they're not pressuring you. I think that a lot of fatigue strategies will adapt to pressure you to stop this, especially to set up, can maybe like counter pitch you, save the Blizzard for this turn, and then put pressure on you when you're trying to do this. Because sometimes you, like I said, if you don't draw the exact 4 cards, you have to take a turn off and try to filter your hand. But 16 Arcane, 9 physical damage. This is the deck stack. A lot of it is completely unblockable, and there's absolutely nothing your opponent can do if they've let you stack your deck and draw these exact 4 cards with one of these cards in Arsenal. Awesome. Well, I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. It's going to be interesting to see how the Tales of Aria meta develops, right? We have a few more weeks of Nationals. I think it might just be a couple at this point. And I think already we're seeing a lot of decks that are coming into the meta that are specifically targeted at Briar. Initially, we saw a lot of fatigue strategies, so Oldhim and Bravo. Now, that strategy might be a little less, might work a little, not as much against most Briars because they'll figure out how to stack the end game like this. But if we look at something like Michael's deck, the guy who won the Calling, his Oldhim deck was much more aggressive, right? It could put pressure on, and I think that ultimately that is the way to deal with Briar. So you can be the ice deck, you can block very efficiently because you're ult him or something like that, but you can still apply pressure and stop them from setting up an unblockable endgame to beat you out. Awesome. Well, until next time, we'll see you in the next video.